one night I had gone out to dinner with Red, and he says, Billy, he says, I got a proposition for you. He says, I met a man named Rick Bassman, and he says, I am going to kind of go and do something I haven't done before, but I'm going to open up a wrestling school. And he says, Rick Bassman has given me a very large check, and he pulls a check out of his wallet and shows it to me. And I don't know if Rick would appreciate me talking about it, but I won't say the amount. It was very substantial. My eyes widened, and he says, he says, Rick Bassman has 4 guys he wants to book as a team called Power Team USA. And I have 2 other guys that were sent to me that I'm going to train. So that's 6 big guys. He says, look, I can't get in the ring with these guys like I could have years before. Red had hip surgery. You know, he was involved in a very serious car accident with Hercules Cortez many years before. He broke his hips. It was horrendous. Hercules Cortez passed away in this car accident. Red was really never the same, even though he wrestled after that. He was never the same, but here's Red at, I don't even know what he was, maybe 50 years old then, whatever he was. And he just said, I can't get in the ring and tumble with these big guys. I can't do it. He says, I can get in and push off as long as I don't have to take a bump or anything sudden to jerk my hips out of alignment or anything. I can't do it. So he says, I need you. I was 29 years old. I was in whatever my prime was. I was there in 85. And he says, I need you to be my man, to go in, show these guys the ropes, take the bumps for these guys, get to know them, be friends with them, and work their asses off. I says, Red, whatever you need. And Red says, there's going to be no money involved, but what I am going to give you is a place to stay. So you got a good solid roof over your head, and I'll buy you dinner whenever I can. And he says, we'll enjoy life. Well, again, wrestling's all I've known at that point in 85. I said, Red, whatever you want, brother. Red was my mentor. Red was like the way I look at Billy or Roddy Piper or Jimmy Snuka. What their word is gold to me, and whatever they wanted from me, I would give them my heart. I'd give them anything. So I said, Red, whatever you need. So Red rented a racquetball court out of a Nautilus Aerobics Plus gym in Northridge, California. This would have probably been around, I don't know, June or maybe July of 85. He had a ring built by Mike Sharp, Iron Mike Sharp's father, Mike Sharp Sr., who was part of Mike and Ben Sharp, famous tag team in the 50s and 60s, whatever. Mike Sharp was long retired, living in LA, and he built rings. Well, he built a very hard-ass ring, like a 15 or I don't even know if it was 16 feet, maybe like a 15 odd-shaped ring, 15 foot that would fit on this racquetball court with plenty of room to be able to still walk around the ring. And, of course, the echo in the racquetball court was horrible. But Red had worked a deal out with the gym to allow him to do this. I think he'd pay the owner a few bucks or the manager on the side, and they would just close this one racquetball court down permanently for a few months for Red to run what he called his training camp. So I go into the camp, and I meet Jim Hellwig, Steve Borden, Mark Miller, Garland Donahoe, Dave Sheldon, and Steve DeSalvo. And I'm looking at these guys, and I'm the smallest amongst them all. I was 225 pounds probably. I was at my thinnest. I still hadn't recovered from my diet of working for Mike LaBelle when I was working to death. Those days, I was actually living in my car at some points. That's how rough things got working for Mike. No disrespect to Mike because he was doing all he could for me, but that was just the way it was. The houses were down, no money, and I was without a place to stay. So I've lived hard, and I understand that. So Red was giving me this good opportunity, and so we worked with these guys, and I know what your questions are because I saw some of the fans asking about, was Warrior hard to work with? Was all this other? I can tell you the deal with that was Red was setting up this camp to train these guys, like a 3-month camp to run 6 days a week, anywhere from 4 to 6 hours a day. Very intense. It was no pansy, like 2 hours, hook up, drop down, take them down, throw them around. It wasn't anything. It was like body slams, suplexes. It was very intense. I was the guinea pig. I learned after training these guys and after I abused my body for a couple months that I'll never again do this and allow six guys, especially Dave Sheldon, who was 6'7". I'll never allow these kind of guys to throw me around. So they got the feel of going up light, and they got the feel of what a pro would feel like on the receiving end. I let them do things to themselves and let them feel like what a stiff guy is going to feel like, and understand that aspect of it, because I was giving them too much. I was giving them my body. So yeah, I went over like Ray Stevens would go over on with somebody. You know, I was taking bumps. I look like $1 million to them. It's like, wow, this is easy. Well, I had to change things around to make them understand it's not going to be like that. It's going to be tough guys in the ring, big, thick guys. They're all big guys. So Warrior was not tough to deal with in those days. Jim Hellwig. Obviously, we didn't call him Sting and Warrior in those days. Jim was not tough to deal with. He was a very, very, very friendly, gracious guy, willing to learn anything and everything pushed toward him. Rick Bassman provided a house for those four guys, for Garland Donahoe, Mark Miller, who you don't hear much about ever again, and Jim and Steve. Those four were staying in a house. Jim had his wife, I think her name was Sherry, staying with him in the house too, which caused a little heat because there he is with the woman. The other guys don't have anybody. They're all in this house. And so Jim was a little more content at night, where the other guys were getting a little antsy. And so Rick provided food for him. He would bring in groceries, as much protein as they could get for these big bodybuilder kind of guys. But I'll tell you, before I get back to training, I want to tell you a story that I think I've only told about one time. I think you'll get a kick out of this. I was with Steve Borden on a NWA show, 87, 88, I don't know. And it was at the Inglewood Forum, the Forum in Inglewood. Steve came in. It was a WCW show. Dusty Rhodes was there, a bunch of guys, you know, the Road Warriors. There's a who's who of the business in the dressing room. I went in to say hello to Steve because I'm obviously quite proud of him at that point. He had a couple years earlier, he had been with me in the school, and I was like, hey, that's my boy. I'm his trainer, blah, blah, blah. Steve was hi-hatting me pretty good. Just like, hey, Billy. It's like, whoa, I don't even get a hug and nothing. Where's my response? You know, you're big time, brother, and I'm like still small time. But I sure as hell busted my ass to help you go where you are. I'm not totally responsible, of course, but I help put you where you are, and you're going to treat me like another fan in the audience? I was a little pissed off. So Steve goes around to the mirror in the bathroom, and Dusty's in there. He's shaving. There's two mirrors and sinks. Dusty's shaving. Steve's over there. And I brought up something that happened to him in 85, and I embarrassed the shit out of him. And I'll tell you the story. I went by, and this is a story I told Steve to remind him. I was at their house during our training. It was only about 2 miles from where we had the school, and I lived a couple miles further on with Red. So on some of my nights off, or a night off from training or whatever, I would stop by the house, hang out with the guys, the four guys. We were all friends, you know. I'd hang out and watch TV, shoot the crap with them. And one night I stop over, and there's Garland and Mark Miller, and I says, "Where's Steve and Jim?" And they said they went out grocery shopping and haven't come back. They should be back any minute. So I'm sitting there watching TV, and about an hour later, this grocery store was only about a quarter of a mile away. I said, where are these guys? All of a sudden, front door comes barging in, and it's Steve. And I says, what is going on? And he's panting. I mean, he looked like he just run a marathon. I said, what is going on? He says, me and Jim were shoplifting out of a grocery store. We were walking down this aisle drinking a gallon of milk each, and we were eating bananas, just peeling them, plowing them in our mouths, and we were throwing the thing down, and we're drinking protein, getting as much food, we're eating some bologna and all this stuff. He says, what? What are you guys? You're crazy. And I said, where's Jim? He says, I don't know. He says, the cops are after him. He says, cop cars were chasing us down streets with lights and everything, and shining it on these alleys where we were hiding. I said, you guys are insane. So about 15, 20 minutes later, Jim Hellwig comes running in the door the same way. just like he did his Warrior entrance. That's how he put it in the house, minus the music and minus the ropes. And he comes in and he's the same thing. I said, Jim, what's going on? He said, brother, the cops are after us. He says, I don't think they saw where we live here, where we're at. He says, you guys are insane. And I said, what happened, Jim? He says, all I know is security chased us out of the store. They called the cops on us in the store. Cops started coming, following us down alleys. But we're so big, they were a little intimidated even. And he says, at one point, he says, I was hiding in an alley behind some trash cans. And he says, my leg was hanging out in the alley. I couldn't fit behind this can. He says, my calf was so big. He says, I could see a light shining on my leg. And he says, I think whoever it was just didn't even want to mess with me. They just left it alone. And they walked off. So anyway, the story is that's their story of trying to survive in LA. They were just green guys, just trying to make it. So I reminded Steve, remember your days, Steve, when you had to steal out of grocery stores to survive in this business? I was there. I saw it. And after that, Steve turns around and gives me a big hug. Billy, I remember, brother. It's good to see you. He was all friendly and all nice. And I'm not trying to say this to embarrass Steve. We all done it. I've done it. I've done it in my life. I'm not, it's just part of life sometimes. I'm not saying this to embarrass Steve and the late Jim Hellwig at all. I'm just saying these are things that happen that sometimes you have to remind people of their roots and where they started from. And don't start hi-hatting everybody like you were better and everything else. We've all been there. You're no different. Yeah, you're making $1 million a year, $500,000 a year at the time, whatever it was. And I'm probably making a couple thousand a month on my indie circuit. But don't sell me that short. And after that, Steve treated me a lot different. A couple of times afterwards, I saw Steve. I did the ring announcing for the World Peace Festival in '96. At the Los Angeles Sports Arena, and that was really a who's who of the business. Inoki and Sakaguchi came in, guys from Mexico, Bam Bam Bigelow, Jericho, Benoit, the Giant, became Big Show. All those guys were on the show, and Lex Luger was on it. And I was sharing a dressing room with Sting, and Lex Luger came in, and Luger didn't know me, and I was I was putting a tuxedo on. So to him, I was a mark, and Luger goes, oh, and he stuck his head in with his bag in his hand, and then he started to walk out. And Sting goes, no, but come in. This is Billy. He's my trainer. Come on in. And Luger came in, shook hands with me, and still walked out. I never forgave Lex for that either, because he looked at it like, oh, I can't be myself around Steve with this guy in the room, like I'm some foreign part of the business. And it's like, you know what? That's fine. So then another show at the Olympic Auditorium, WCW was there with Sting on it. And the Steiners and him were sharing a dressing room, and he did the same thing. He brought me in. He said, hey, Rick, Scott, this is Bill Anderson. This is my guy that trained me and broke me in. They weren't overly friendly, but that's just the way they are. And I appreciated Steve being respectful. That's all I ask. I don't say, hey, brother, you got an extra 1,000 to give. I don't just want a handshake and a hug. That's all. Recognition, a little bit. Remember your roots. That's all. But that's a little bit sidetracked from the training. But I wanted to tell you that story. Had to remind Steve, you're a human being and you have faults just like all of us. And just because you're making big money, don't mean shit.
How was the Warrior from that perspective?
He was always 1,000% with me, always greeting me with Billy, big hugs. You probably saw the pictures I posted of him with my son. My son is literally a couple months old, and he's taking pictures kissing my son. Jim was fantastic. Jim would say when he was champion and working shows, no matter what arena, he'd say, Billy, you have any of your boys from your school here? And I go, yeah, I got a couple guys. They're here as extras or TV tapings or whatever. He says, hey, if you want me to take pictures with them, anything you want, bring them on in. And he'd throw the belt on their shoulder like he did with me, throw the belt on, take pictures, and he'd be nothing but first class. And he'd say, listen to Billy. He'll steer you right. Do whatever Billy tells you, and he's your guy. And always give good words of advice to the boys, my students. Always first class. Never, ever, ever high-hatted me and like, I don't have time for this shit. It was always like, Billy, thank you. It's nice to see you again. Always.
There was a story in Bret Hart's book that I found a little hard to believe, that the Warrior supposedly kayfabed a Make-A-Wish kid, knowing the Warrior, could you imagine him refusing to see a Make-A-Wish kid?
I honestly can't. I mean, I don't know. I've never heard that story, but I can tell you of all things with Jim and kids and that sort of thing, I can't believe it would happen. I mean, if it did, it did, but I certainly find it very, very, very hard to believe. I saw Jim just like I saw Hulk Hogan, and for that part, for that much, for that respect, even Andre the Giant, that really never turned down autographs with people, no matter how inconvenient it was. God knows, we've all been there, carrying your bag, you're tired, you've even left the ring after you juiced, and you're all bloody, and fans are still sticking stuff out for you to sign, and you feel guilty, but at the same time, you got business to do, but you still try you were more of a heel probably. I was a baby face a lot, but I always felt obligated. Even at the very least, I'd say, "Can you wait till I get done in the locker room and clean up?" I would always do that, but I would always sign autographs and everything. I always felt obligated, but I find it hard to believe Jim would do that. Honestly, it's not
Yeah,
the style.
me too. There's a few other things in that book that's a little questionable. I just wanted a few fans always bring that up, so I just wanted your opinion on it. Was there any point in their training where you thought that they might actually give up and not finish the training?
No, but I can tell you something I've never told on an interview here, and I'll get to it. But I can tell you that it's without a doubt, and I'd be a fool to say it otherwise. Obviously, Steve Borden had the most athletic ability of these six guys. You could see the spring in his feet. Eventually when he would do that big jump into the corner and all. Oh, I saw all that, but I'm from another era. I never envisioned Rick Bassman's portrayal of four guys going into a territory as a team. We're lucky to have had at that time the trios of the Road Warriors with Paul Ellering or trios of the Freebirds. Those were rare to have three guys in a territory like come in for main events. Promoters couldn't afford it. It was just business. So to have four guys as a vision, I personally didn't see it. And I admire Rick. He was a visionary. Rick was trying to do something different, obviously thinking outside the box for the business. And I appreciate that. At the time, I didn't see it coming, personally. And I don't know if Red did or not. Red had dollar signs. Red was business. Red was all business. And but where I'm going with this story is because I saw somebody asked, how did they become the Blade Runners and all this stuff? If you want me to tell that part of the story, I could kind of lead to that.
Sure.
Okay. So what ended up happening after about 3 months, maybe even a little less than 3 months, I get a phone call. I was at Reds. I get a phone call from Jim Hellwig, and he says, "Hey, Billy," he says, "can you meet me and Steve down at Gold's Gym in Venice, like today or it was tomorrow, whatever it was, 35 years ago." It's hard to remember the exact scenario, but he says, "Can you meet us at Gold's Gym? We want to talk to you." And I says, "Yeah, whatever you want, Jim." So I met them at the time that they specified, and we were outside of Gold's Gym in the parking lot. And Jim says, "We have some ideas that we've run by each other, and we want to talk to you about it. And we want your perspective because you are the only guy that has no money interest in us. And we trust you." I built up a friendship with these guys. They knew me. They knew I wasn't going to bullshit them or anything. He says, "We trust your judgment, and you have no vested interest financially in us, one way or the other, to lead us astray." He says, "But we have some offers and we have some thoughts going on." And I says, "Well, tell me what you got going on." He says, "Well, first of all, us two guys don't think Mark and Garland are going to cut it." And I go, as a team, as a four-man team. And I said, "Okay, I'm with you on that. I could see that they were just going through the motions of training. Nice guys, but they did not have that. I don't know how to describe it. It's the it factor, the eye of the tiger, if you want to say that. They didn't have it. Jim and Steve had it. They were vested to go further in this business. So they said, we want to break off from this four-man concept. Not going to work. We haven't talked to Rick Bassman about this. And sorry, Rick, I mean, no disrespect to Rick Bassman, who I know is going to watch this, and I'm very sorry, but this is the way it went down. And he says, but we talked to Red slightly about this, and Red said, I can get you booked up in Calgary for Stu Hart. He says, but here's the deal. He says, if you go up to Calgary, he says, I want to say 15%. I think it was 15% of your next 5 years' earnings. And I can get you booked up for Stu as a team right now. This was like, I believe, September of 85. And he says, we have another idea. He says, Steve and Jim both said, we have taken pictures as a team, and we had pictures that Rick had taken of different members of the team together, twosomes. And we sent pictures to Jerry Lawler in Memphis. So he says, if you were us, what would you do? I said, well, me being an independent kind of guy, don't really like to be told what to do too much. Never signed a contract, which is probably detrimental to my career too. I said, I wouldn't do what Red said. I wouldn't want to go up to Calgary in the winter and make those long.
It was bad there too to begin with.
Yeah. And he says, I wouldn't want to go up to the snow country in Calgary in the winter. I think that'd be like hell on earth. And it's no disrespect to Stu and the boys. Everyone knows the dungeon and the respect for the Hart family. That goes without saying in the business. No disrespect to Red or to them. But I said, I had worked in Tennessee in 75, 10 years before. I said, I was Bill Colt down there. I was wrestling 7 days a week, 3 times on Saturdays. We'd work Huntsville TV, Birmingham TV in the afternoon on a Saturday afternoon, and then go to Chattanooga in the Saturday night show. I said, you will get nothing but experience down there. Your pay might be crap, but your experience is what you need. Because any trainer worth his weight in gold knows you can only teach somebody so much in a ring. It's what you learn in front of a paying crowd to get the response that you need. You need fan response, not just our approval. Mine or Red Bastine standing down on the floor. Hey, that looks good. That looks good. It's not the same as when you do it in front of a crowd. I had students freeze up at WWF TV tapings. I had a guy, Vince McMahon. I had this a bodybuilder guy, freeze up working with Steve Lombardi. He was getting a tryout. Froze. Lombardi ate him up, spit him out, and that was the end of that. But Vince said, I want to see what this guy's got. He froze. He knew how to work. He froze in the ring in Selland Arena in Fresno. Froze in front of like 10,000 fans. Couldn't do shit. Nothing. Froze up. So I know what that's like. I said, this is what you guys need. Steve, Jim, you guys need experience. We've taught you what we can teach. Sure, we could keep going on and on. Taught them drop kicks. They all knew how to drop kick. They all knew how monkey flips. They know how to do all the stuff you never saw Jim Hellwig do. Believe me, to all you naysayers, he knew wrestling holds. He knew them, but he didn't have to do them. He was told, run to the ring. You're a unique gimmick. You're a unique person. Excite the fans. He wasn't about to go out there and do Dynamite Kid type moves or Jannetty and Michaels moves or act like the Rockers the Midnight Express or the Midnight Rockers or any other team, the Rock and Roll Express. He wasn't going to go out there and act like that. He was a power kind of guy, and that's what Vince wanted out of him, and that's exactly what he delivered. And he busted his ass doing that gimmick. But that is where they got their start. They went down. They ended up forgetting what Red said, forgetting Rick Bassman. And I don't know if there was a contract involved with Rick and all that. It was none of my business. I didn't understand or deal with that. I was giving them straight, honest advice, wrestler to wrestler, go to Tennessee. And that's exactly what they did. And I guess they became Rock and whatever, Rock in a Hard Place. I don't know what they became down there and became these Blade Runners or something. And for the good and bad of it, they made 1,000 mistakes because I know Jim, I think, ended up going to Bill Watts' territory, and he got his ass kicked, I guess, in the dressing room. I heard by somebody. Don't know if it was like I can't think who it was, but anyway, they made their mistake.
Watts himself had some type of confrontation with Jim.
Yeah.
And then Sting. No, it was Sting that got his ass kicked by what's his name?
Was it Bob? No, not Bob Roop.
Dick Slater.
Dick Slater. Dick Slater. That's who I pictured his face, couldn't get his name out. Yeah, Dick Slater. Yeah, and I had heard those kind of stories, But that's just part of the business. They were big guys, and sure, they probably went in a little overconfident because they were in probably better shape looking than a lot of the boys in the territory. I mean, when you look at those guys compared to Al Madril or Chavo Guerrero, for that matter, body wise, not talent wise, of course, but body wise, a promoter was starting to elevate them, which makes jealousies, creates egos, and everything else. So their overconfidence probably led them to a lot of problems. And I understand that. I didn't have those problems because I never had the body. So I never had those kind of ego problems. I looked at the business completely different.
Are, are you surprised at how fast they became superstars?
Yes, I never would have thought that. Um, I never envisioned them to go as far as they did ever. It surprised me that within a few years they're both world champions of WCW and WWF. That was shocking. In one way, it's surprising, and in another, it wasn't, because they did have this extra abnormal drive. And Sting had that drive, and Jim did too. Jim had the drive in the gym, which developed that body. And of course, I know steroids are involved, but he had a drive like very few men. He had the drive of a professional bodybuilder. And you know what kind of drive that takes, to diet and sacrifice so much to do this. It's incredible. And they made those sacrifices. And Steve obviously was the better wrestler. But he was in a territory where it was necessary in WCW. That was just the style that he worked out perfect for them, to work with Ric Flair and all the guys he did. I watched a lot of those matches with a lot of pride. And I remember all those workouts we had, and I saw Steve, the spring in his legs. He could have been an outstanding basketball player, or any sport for that matter. He's a natural athlete.
There was some talk in '93 that Warrior was going to go to WCW and potentially feud with Sting. What do you think about if that would have happened? Would you think that would have been a cool feud, or would they have not meshed well?
I kind of tend to think it wouldn't have gone well, personally. I just don't think. I think what they did with Warrior in WWF or WWE, I think was the right way to present him, wrestling against like Bobby Heenan and different characters of him just doing power things. I don't think it would have come off the same working with Sting as the same. But I was there in '96, I believe, at the Bash at the Beach in Huntington Beach, California, a WCW show where Jim came in and he was negotiating, because he came in, I saw him there, and he was negotiating with Eric Bischoff, and he went into Sting's trailer, and they were talking about doing some stuff, and I don't remember whatever happened to that. I was kind of really wrapped up in my wrestling school at the time, all through the '90s and early 2000, 2001. But I don't know whatever materialized from that. But I was just there behind the scenes, talking to Gene Okerlund, Nick Bockwinkel, Arn Anderson, and different guys that were friends of mine, and talking to them. And it's where I met Angelo Poffo, and was talking to Randy Savage and different guys there. But I know, I think Warrior, his run was perfect for WWF at the time. What they wanted out of him, to be a kid superstar, be a fan of the kids, to look up to this amazing athlete that ran to the ring and all this power and glory and all this stuff. And that was it. He was just the ultimate baby face.
Did you ever see them in the actual weightlifting gym?
Yes, I saw Jim working out. It was pretty amazing at Gold's Gym. I went down there a couple of times because Don Ross, who wrestled as Ripper Savage, was a very good friend of mine, and he had an office at Gold's Gym in Venice. And I don't know, you know Don Ross. He was a former Mr. America, and back in his day, but he became a writer for Muscle and Fitness and all these different magazines, Iron Man and all this stuff. And I'd go down and visit Don. He was a good guy, and I'd see Sting and Warrior down there training and everything. And it was real intense. And that's where Mark Miller was actually one of the other four guys. He was an employee at a front desk of Gold's Gym. That's how he supplemented his income and everything. And those two guys, Garland Donahoe and Mark Miller never went really anywhere. They worked a couple indie shows around Los Angeles in probably 86, and then they phased out and never really heard anything from them ever again. And so obviously that proved the point that Steve and Jim knew they needed to be off on their own. And it was far more reasonable, like I said, of 2 guys going into a territory. It was very acceptable. 4 guys, I didn't see it. I mean, God bless Rick Bassman for having that vision to do a power team USA and have these 4 guys, red, white, and blue baby faces, wearing these beautiful matching outfits. Great concept. I didn't see it personally, but who knows?
And of course, Rick Bassman went on to start a lot of people's careers, such as the John Cena's, the
Yeah.
Hyde Wrights, a lot of long list of wrestlers. Did he ever hold anything against you for how that worked out?
Not that he ever told me. We've never had words about that. And that's why, I mean, in hindsight, obviously looking back on things, it's embarrassing to admit in my own way, I kind of screwed over Rick and my best friend, Red Bastine, who I'm living with. Red could have probably used 15% of their money for the next 5 years under contract or whatever. I didn't mean to hurt these men. They were my friends too. I knew Rick Bassman. I knew Red. I love those guys too. I had a lot of respect, but Jim and Steve asked me for an opinion to be straight with them. And I was straight with them. I said, if I was you, I would go to Tennessee. I said, Lawler will treat you right in giving you the bookings you need to get the experience. So I had no regret on telling them that. Obviously, somebody's going to get hurt any way you cut it. And I don't know where they would have ended up if they would have gone to Calgary. It's hard to say, putting those 2 guys in Calgary and what Stu might have done to them. Probably kicked the shit out of them for sure. That dungeon would not have been kind to them.
No.
That's for sure.
I think it was harder territory than Mid-South, and Mid-South was a really hard territory just because of the travel and the weather conditions. So it probably would have ended similar to the way Mid-South ended for them.
Yeah, that's what I imagine. I just, I had heard stories for 10 years about how brutal the winters are in Canada. So, I mean, my common sense said, stay where it's warmer. I meant that. And plus, not only the weather, I looked at the wrestling part of it. And I was honest with them and told them, you guys will get the experiences, what you need.
And also for the percentage that those guys were supposed to pay Red and Rick Bassman, I've actually never heard of any of those trainer percentage deals actually being honored. Sometimes I've heard the wrestlers have given like a payoff. Like I think Ric Flair gave Vern Gagne a flat fee, but I don't think any wrestlers ever given like 15% of their pay for 5 years.
Well, I mean, I couldn't imagine it. Now, I'm sure Red maybe could have set something up with Stu because they were friends and maybe made that happen as far as that aspect for a while up there. But once they left there, I don't know, when they booked out of there, I don't know where Red would still be getting this honor of this, receiving this money. It's something I never got involved in training with Spicoli or anybody else that I ever trained. And I know the Ultimate Warrior has been always a great topic to talk about. And I just hope people remember he was in an era that it was a little different than today. I don't know completely how Warrior's gimmick would work today. I don't follow the product so much today, but in the 80s, it worked, in the late 80s. And it was a Road Warrior style. You didn't see the Road Warriors doing too many holds. You didn't see Brody doing too many holds. And it was just a style that he had, and it's a style that Vince wanted him to have, and probably more important, Pat Patterson wanted him to have, and influenced Vince and said, if it works, it works. Don't change what works.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Support us on patreon.com for $1.99 a month to watch our full shoot interviews ad-free and help our channel grow. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.